My name is Nkechi Izzy, and I want to ask you something before I tell you this story. Have you ever given someone everything? Your time, your name, your trust, your future, and watched them take all of it and walk away like you were nothing? Like you were a stepping stone, not a person. Like the years you gave them were just a resource to be used and discarded. Have you ever felt that? Because if you have, then this story is for you. And if you haven't, then listen carefully. Because the people who do this to you are not strangers. They are not enemies. They are the ones closest to you. The ones you would never suspect. The ones who know exactly how much you love them and use that love like a key. My brother's name is Tobena Izzy. And for 30 years, I believed he was the best person I knew. I was wrong. Let me tell you about Tobena the way I knew him growing up, because this is where the story actually begins. Not in Lagos, not in the boardrooms and the betrayal. In our mother's house in Onitsha, where we grew up sharing everything. The same small bedroom, the same bowl of soup when money was short, the same determination to become something different from what our circumstances had decided for us. Tobena was brilliant. I say that without bitterness because it is simply true. He had the kind of mind that solved problems before other people had finished understanding them. He was funny and warm, and he had a laugh that filled the room. When we were children, he would stay up late helping me with mathematics that he had already finished hours earlier, explaining the same thing 4 different ways until I understood it. Patient, generous, kind. That is who I believed he was. That is who he showed me he was for 30 years. And then I found out who he actually was. And the distance between those two people, between the brother I loved and the man he had been operating as behind my back, was so large that I still, even now, even after everything, find it difficult to fully contain in my mind. Let me tell you about the business, because the business is where everything happened. Tobena came to me 7 years ago with a plan. He wanted to start a logistics company. Supply chain, distribution, the movement of goods between manufacturers and retailers across the Southeast. It was a good plan. He had done the research. He had the contacts from years of working in operations for a large firm in Lagos. What he did not have was capital, and what he did not have was a name. A name matters in business, not just a reputation, an actual name, a name that people in the right rooms recognize and associate with reliability and track record. Tobena's name was not yet that name. He had worked hard, but he had worked in the background, the kind of work that builds skill, but not visibility. My name was different. I had spent 12 years building a career in financial consulting, slowly, carefully, with the particular attention to detail of someone who understands that trust is built over time and lost in a moment. By the time Tobena came to me with his plan, my name in certain circles in Lagos and Abuja carried weight. People answered my calls. People returned my messages. People took meetings because I had asked for them. Tobena said, "I need your help." I said, "What do you need?" He said, "Introductions, connections, and your name on some of the early paperwork, just to open the right doors. Once the company is established, we restructure and I take it fully. But right now, your name is what will make people take this seriously." I looked at my brother, the man who had explained mathematics to me 4 different ways at midnight, the man who had stood at my mother's funeral and held my hand through the entire service without letting go once. I said, "Of course. Of course." 2 words spoken in 30 seconds. And those 2 words changed the next 7 years of my life in ways I could not have imagined if I had tried. Now I want to ask you something. Would you have done the same? If your brother came to you with a plan and asked for your name and your connections, would you have said yes? Think about it. Tell me in the comments, because I have asked myself that question every day for 2 years and I still do not have a clean answer. What happened next happened slowly. That is the thing about this kind of betrayal. It does not arrive all at once. It builds layer by layer, decision by decision, each one small enough that you can explain it away. Each one just slightly over the line of what you agreed to, but not so far over that you feel justified in making it a confrontation. The first thing was the paperwork. My name stayed on longer than we had agreed. I asked about the restructuring. Tobena said, soon, just a little longer. We are not stable enough yet. Give it one more quarter. I gave it one more quarter, and then another, and then another. The second thing was the introductions. I introduced him to 3 people that mattered: a distribution director at a large manufacturer, a procurement officer at a government agency, a senior partner in a firm that handled logistics contracts for 2 of the biggest retailers in the country. These introductions took years to be in a position to make. They were not favors I could easily repeat. I made them for my brother because he needed them and I trusted him. All 3 of those relationships by the end knew Tobena but did not know me. He had taken over the connection so completely that when I eventually tried to reach one of them for a separate matter of my own, she said, "Oh, I know your brother well, but I don't think we've actually spoken directly." We had spoken directly. She had taken my call, agreed to meet Tobena at my request, and then Tobena had moved so seamlessly into that relationship that I had been edited out of it entirely. The third thing, and this is the one that I am still, even now, trying to fully process, was the money. I want to stop here for a moment and ask you something directly. Have you ever had someone use your name so completely that people in your own industry thought they were dealing with you when they were dealing with them? Has someone ever taken your reputation and worn it like a coat, walking through doors that your years of work had opened while you were somewhere else, not even knowing it was happening? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know I am not alone. The money. When Tobena first asked for my name on the paperwork, I did not ask for anything in return. He was my brother. The idea of charging him for my help felt wrong in a way that I could not even articulate. You do not charge your brother. You do not put a price on family. That is what I believed. What I did not understand was that by not putting a price on my help, I had made it free. And things that are free have no weight. They can be taken without consequence. They can be used without accounting. They can be consumed completely without anyone ever having to acknowledge that they were consuming something real. Tobena consumed my name, my connections, and 200,000 naira that I lent him in the second year of the business when a contract required a deposit he could not cover. He said he would pay it back in 90 days. He paid back 50,000 in the first year and then stopped mentioning it. I did not push. He was my brother. I told myself the money would come. I told myself the business was still growing. I told myself that the man who helped me with mathematics at midnight would not take 200,000 naira from me and simply stop mentioning it. I was wrong about that too. I found out the full shape of what had been happening the way you find out most devastating truths. Not from the person who should have told you, but from a stranger who assumed you already knew. I was at a conference in Abuja. A man introduced himself to me, a director at a manufacturing firm I recognized as one of Eze Logistics' major clients. He said, "You must be very proud of what your brother has built." I said, "Yes." He said, "Your family name has become very respected in this industry. What Tobena has done in 7 years is remarkable. And of course, your involvement in the early stages was critical. The way he tells it, it was really your connections and reputation that gave the company its foundation." I said, "Yes, I was glad to help." He said, "He mentions you often, always says that Nkechi Eze is the reason any of this was possible." He smiled and moved on to the next conversation. I stood in the middle of that conference hall in Abuja and I thought, he mentions me. He tells people I am the reason. He says my name. He gives me credit in conversations I am not in, to people I have never met, for a foundation I built with my own years and my own reputation and my own 200,000 naira. And in 7 years, he has not once picked up the phone and said, "Nkechi, I want you to know that what you did for me changed my life. Thank you. Here is what I owe you. Here is how I'm going to make this right." Not once. I stood in that conference hall and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. The particular cold of understanding something you have been half knowing for a long time and have just been handed the final piece of. I called Tobena that evening. He answered on the second ring the way he always did for me because I was his sister and he loved me and he had always picked up my calls. He said, "Nkechi, how is Abuja? Is the conference good?" I said, "Tobena, I met someone today. a director at one of your clients." He said, "Ah, yes, which one?" I told him. He said, "Good man. Did he treat you well?" I said, "He told me you mention me often, that you tell people I was the foundation of the business." A pause. Small, not long enough to be suspicious, but I had known this man for 30 years and I heard the calculation in it. I heard him deciding in that pause how to play the next 30 seconds. He said, "Of course I do. You were. I always give you credit, Nkechi. You know that." I said, "Do I?" Another pause. I said, "Tobena, when was the last time you gave me credit to my face, in a room where I was present? When was the last time you said to someone in front of me, 'This is my sister Nkechi, this business exists because of her'?" Silence. I said, "When are we restructuring the company the way we agreed? When are you paying back the 200,000? When does my name come off paperwork I did not agree to still be on?" The silence on the other end of that phone was the longest silence I had ever heard from my brother. And in that silence, I understood everything I needed to understand. I heard, in the absence of his voice, the shape of 7 years of decisions he had made while I was somewhere else not watching. Okay, I want to pause here and ask you, be honest with me in the comments. At what point would you have confronted him? When the restructuring didn't happen after the first quarter? When the money wasn't paid back after 90 days? Or would you have waited like I did because you loved him and you believed in him and the idea of your brother betraying you was so painful that you chose not to see it until it was impossible to look away? Tell me. I genuinely want to know, because I have judged myself for waiting so long, and I am still deciding whether that judgment is fair. The conversation that followed that phone call, when Tobena finally came to Lagos to talk to me in person, was the hardest conversation of my life. Harder than my mother's funeral. Harder than the end of my marriage 3 years ago. Harder than anything I had experienced, because all of those things had happened to me from outside. This was happening from inside, from someone who was supposed to be the inside. He came to my apartment on a Saturday morning. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten together dozens of times, where he had brought his problems and I had helped him think through them, where I had made him tea and listened and given and given and given. He sat at that table, and he said things that I will not repeat in full because some conversations are private even when the broad shape of them is a story worth telling. What I will tell you is that he acknowledged what he had done, not completely, not with the full accounting I deserved, but enough. He acknowledged that the restructuring had been delayed deliberately. He acknowledged that the money had not been repaid because he had told himself I didn't need it, that I was doing well and the company needed it more. He acknowledged that he had used my name beyond what we agreed because it worked and because he had told himself I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind. My brother had looked at my name, my reputation, my connections, my 200,000 naira, and my 12 years of careful work, and he had decided I wouldn't mind. I sat at my kitchen table, and I looked at the man who had explained mathematics to me at midnight, and I thought about what love costs when it is given to someone who has decided that your love means you will not demand an accounting. I thought about my mother, about how she used to say, "Nkechi, you love too freely. You give before you are asked, and you forgive before you are owed an apology. That is beautiful, but be careful. Not everyone knows how to receive that kind of love without using it." Mama, you were right. I should have listened. What I did after that conversation surprised even me. I did not rage. I did not cut him off immediately. I did not go to his clients and his business partners and tell them the full shape of what he had done. I had the right to. I had the standing. My name was still on some of that paperwork. I could have made things very difficult. I did not. Instead, I did something much smaller and much more specific. I sat down with a lawyer and I documented everything: the original agreement, the timeline of the restructuring that never happened, the money, the paperwork. I documented it quietly and completely, not as a weapon to use immediately, as a record, as a way of saying to the universe, this happened, I know it happened, it is written down somewhere. And then I waited, not passively. I went back to my own work. I rebuilt the connections that had been partially absorbed into Tobena's business. I made new ones. I focused, for the first time in 7 years, entirely on my own career rather than on helping his. Within 18 months, I had closed the 2 largest contracts of my professional life. Both came through connections that had nothing to do with Tobena, nothing to do with Eze Logistics, nothing to do with any of the 7 years I had spent building someone else's foundation. Both came because my name, on its own, was enough. I want to ask you one more thing before I tell you how this ends. Do you believe that what you give in secret, the help you give without announcement, the support you provide without asking for credit, the love you spend on people who take it quietly, do you believe that God sees it, that it goes somewhere, that it is not wasted even when the person you gave it to treats it like it was nothing? Tell me what you think, because what happened next made me believe the answer is yes. Eze Logistics began to struggle in the 3rd year after our conversation. Not immediately. Businesses built on borrowed foundations tend to last for a while before the ground shows through. But by the 3rd year, the contracts that had been secured through my introductions had either ended or moved to competitors. The relationships that Tobena had absorbed from me had, it turned out, been relationships with me. When I was no longer actively connected to the business, the warmth that had made those relationships work began to cool. He called me twice during that period. I took both calls. I was civil and I was honest, and I told him what I saw from the outside and what I thought he should do. Not because I owed him anything, because he was still my brother, and some things do not change even when other things change completely. He did not take my advice. That was his choice. The company did not collapse. I want to be clear about that. I am not telling you a story where everything is destroyed and justice arrives like a thunderbolt. That is not how life works, and I will not pretend it is. Tobena's company contracted. It became smaller and less significant. He is still working, still building, still trying. He will probably find his way back to something solid eventually. But the name that had carried him, the name he had borrowed and used and worn without asking, that name is no longer available to him. That bridge he burned without realizing he was standing on it. What I have now is different from what I had before. Before, I had a career and a brother I believed was my closest person in the world. Now, I have a career that is entirely, undeniably, completely mine. And I have a brother who is more honestly himself to me than he has ever been, not because he became a better person overnight, but because the performance is finished. He knows I know, and there is something almost restful about that, even when it is painful. My mother used to say, the truth does not arrive when you want it. It arrives when you are ready to carry it. I was not ready for 7 years, and then I was, and the truth arrived, and it was heavy, and it was painful, and it changed the shape permanently. But I am carrying it, and I am still here, and what is mine, the real things, the things built on honest years and honest work, those things are still mine. God does not forget what you gave, and he does not forget what was taken. That I know for certain. That I have seen with my own eyes.